Hi everyone, I'm Erin Remblance and I'm recording this presentation for you from Sydney, Australia. I'm so happy and humbled to be able to present to you today. And before I begin, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Sarah and her colleagues for pulling together such an amazing event. It's no small feat, I'm sure. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about where degrowth currently exists and what we can do to get to a degrowth future. Firstly, where does degrowth currently exist? The places I'm about to describe haven't gone through a contraction of production and consumption, but they are examples of places that aren't primarily and virtually exclusively focused on economic growth. In this way, they represent degrowth where the D means away from rather than the D meaning down. Firstly, we have the Indian state of Kerala, an area of vast natural beauty. It also happens to be one of the most sustainable places on Earth. Kerala represents 1% of the land area of India and around 3% of the population. They have a per capita income of 12,376 US dollars, which is roughly 1/6 that of the USA, which is the same as their CO2 emissions, which are 2.84 tons per capita. It's also around 1/6 that of the USA, and a quarter of the material footprint per capita of the USA at 8.53 tons. So the people of Kerala achieve a lot with very little. So what is Kerala doing right? Kerala has a higher human development index than some European countries and ranks 11th on the Sustainable Development Index when compared to other nations around the world. It has the highest daily wages in India, a strong labor movement, strong trade unions, and progressive land reforms. It has the highest literacy rate in all of India at 94%. All villages and cities are electrified. It is considered the best governed state in India and declared one of the states where citizens experience the lowest instances of corruption. It has a very low poverty rate, around 0.71%, the lowest in India. It also has the lowest infant mortality rate and the lowest rate of positive population growth in India. The state has also declared internet access as a fundamental right, and a publicly owned broadband service will be providing access for free to more than 2 million people. Kerala is not perfect. There is more they could do with regard to the environment. There's more they could do to improve gender equality and to reduce morbidity among people, but it's hard to deny what they have managed to achieve. Why is Kerala able to achieve such excellent outcomes? There is literally a term academics have coined, which is the Kerala model of development. It is a model of development that prioritizes sustainable social and human development over economic growth. Kerala is unique in many ways, resulting in very high levels of democracy or radical democracy. This means the citizens of Kerala are very politically engaged. Labor is very well organized, governance is decentralized, resulting in much more local decision-making, and those decisions are made with community participation. This has resulted in higher government funding of education, healthcare, and poverty reduction over the last century. Interestingly and importantly, Kerala has a high number of cooperative and social enterprise businesses, which means there is greater democracy in their economic decisions, not just their political decisions. This is largely missing in Western nations and is really important because this lack of economic democracy ultimately affects our political democracy, a situation we refer to as state capture, where corporations have more control over policy than citizens. How could we be more like Kerala? There are 3 key elements to achieving a more sustainable economic model. Number 1 is significantly reduce, or even better, remove corporate organizational structures. 2, remove political donations and the revolving door between industry and politics. 3, removing concentrated media ownership. We do this by building grassroots movements and by better and stronger organized labor. Another place where degrowth exists is stunning Costa Rica, ranked number 1 on the Sustainable Development Index. Costa Rica can achieve such high levels of sustainability because of its commitment to universalism. The principle that everyone should have equal access to generous, high-quality social services as a basic right. From the 1950s onwards, healthcare, education, and social security was provided to the whole population. Costa Rica even abolished the military to free up more resources for social spending. I think it's important to note here that Costa Rica wasn't the only country to try and implement such policies. Many other democratically elected progressive governments tried to do exactly the same, but, and to quote Jason Hickel, in nearly every case, the US violently intervened to stop them for fear that communist ideas might scupper American interests in the region. The resistance against policies that meet human needs with the lowest environmental impact is real and has existed for decades. Where else do we see degrowth? There are lots of other places, ways of life, and philosophies I could share with you, but unfortunately I don't have time today. Here is a not exhaustive list of other places or concepts that are degrowth aligned for those who are interested in delving further, including Buen Viver, Ubuntu, and the People's Agreement of Cochabamba. A question I get asked a lot is, how can we get to a degrowth future? So I've pulled together all of the research and ideas I've seen on this topic to provide something of a blueprint for us. There is a quote from Ernest Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises. It goes, "How did you go bankrupt?" Bill asked. "Two ways," Mike said, "gradually and then suddenly." I think this also applies to how we can achieve the future we want. When it comes to gradual change, social tipping points are our best lever for change. We need to get enough people on board with the concept of living within our means that we tip social norms so that the minority views on what is possible quickly become majority views and action becomes inevitable. It's also about moving the Overton window on politically safe topics that political candidates can campaign on. When have we reached social tipping points in the past? In an article titled, "After the Failure of COP26, There's Only One Last Hope for Our Survival," George Monbiot points to the remarkably swift reduction in smoking, the rapid shift in nations such as the UK and Ireland away from homophobia, and the Me Too movement, which greatly reduced the social tolerance of sexual abuse and everyday sexism. Looking further back, we can also see the activism of the suffragettes and the civil rights movement on having a huge impact of the society's views on women's rights and racial segregation and discrimination. And how do we reach a social tipping point? We get there by multiple sources of reinforcement, which essentially means many people speaking up. The research indicates that 25% is the magic number. When 25% of people care about an issue, it very quickly becomes 75% or more of people who feel this way. Importantly, the power of small groups comes not from their authority or their wealth, but from their commitment to the cause. And we can see that with groups like Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and Greta Thunberg and the school strikers. I love this quote by George Monbiot about how we can activate social tipping points. He says, "Let's be embarrassing. Let's break the silence, however uncomfortable it makes us and others feel. Let's talk about the great unmentionables, not just climate breakdown, but also growth and consumerism. Let's create the political space in which well-intentioned parties can act. Let us talk a better world into being." Jason Hickel also has two levers that could help us achieve a degrowth future. The first being the environmental movement uniting with Labour. He says, "It is urgently important for environmentalists to build alliances with the unions, the labour movements, and other working class political formations that have much more political leverage, including the power of the strike." In a piece he wrote titled How to Achieve Full Decolonization, Hickel also highlights that the global South could play a role. He says, the South has the power to enforce degrowth in the North by refusing to be used as a supplier of cheap labor and raw materials for Northern consumption. The article goes into much more details on decolonization than the quote I have pulled out, but I think it's an interesting idea to consider. And what happens after we reach a social tipping point? It is all about democracy, democracy, democracy. As Julia Steinberger says, the way forward here is democracy. To break dependency and state capture requires expanding the scope of democracy to our economies. We need active economic citizenship and expanded decision-making at the level of workers, community members, households, and at all different levels of governance. Julia is highlighting here, just like in the example of Kerala I shared earlier, that democracy should not only exist politically, but also with regard to the economic decisions we make. Sometimes, usually in times of crisis, there is an opportunity for change to happen suddenly. We saw this in World War II, where American industry stopped what they'd been doing and instead turned their efforts to mobilizing for war. There was no private car manufacturing for 3 years. Employment virtually disappeared as everyone stepped up to do their bit. Goods were rationed and sacrificing items became the norm. A culture of sacrifice, efficiency, and cooperation resulted as people learnt to conserve vital resources, lived with price controls, dealt with shortages on many items, and began to grow their own food. We also saw sudden changes during the COVID-19 pandemic, where governments around the world implemented policies that would have previously been considered impossible, including closing international borders, closing schools, implementing lockdowns and work from home mandates, and the closure of non-essential businesses, and providing financial assistance for those affected by such measures. Which brings me to this quote by one of, if not the most influential economist of the 20th century, Milton Friedman. He says, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. And I think that really is our job, both to move the needle towards the social tipping point and also to ensure that degrowth policies are alive and lying around, as Milton would say, ready to be deployed for the moment they are politically inevitable. I wanted to leave you with this parting thought. It's a quote that I come back to now and again from the book Bright Green Lies. When the call of your heart becomes the work of your hands, that may be what tips the balance back toward life. So never give up. Whatever you love, it is under assault. But love is a verb. May that love call us to action. Thank you very much for your time.